The great outdoors can help us build many virtues, and our guest today, Michael Boucher, is here to tell us about the importance of outdoorsmanship for boys.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Mladinich, your host, and we're talking today with Michael Boucher about the importance of outdoorsmanship for boys. Michael Boucher is an avid outdoorsman with decades of experience teaching and counseling youth. His new book, which I'm really excited about, The Snipe Hunter's Deadly Catch at Muskrat Creek, and I have a link for that in the show notes, follows 3 teens as they use their outdoor skills to survive an unexpected adventure, learning the importance of honesty, perseverance, and forgiveness in the process. And I have a little personal bio here from Michael that I want to read to you because it's lots of fun. Okay, so here's what Michael says about himself. A tough but beloved nun assigned a Michigan history lesson. Father Jacques Marquette was paddling a canoe, founding Sault Ste. Marie, discovering the Mississippi, and dodging headhunters. I heard the call of the wild. I've paddled in Minnesota's Boundary Waters, Ontario's Quetico Wilderness, on 4 Great Lakes, completed mountaineering survival training, Northwest Outward Bound School, and with my daughter earned the Presidential Fitness Canoe Award, paddling 250 miles. I'm smitten by the majesty of God's creation and the peace and serenity of Thoreau's Walden Pond. After college and graduate school, I was a counselor for Catholic Family Service, college instructor in sociology and psychology, a school social worker, and an advisor, teaching assistant for Michigan State University. I backpacked through 10 European countries, visited Lourdes with my wife, Catherine, and worked Habitat for Humanity projects twice in Armenia. In autumn, my 2 daughters and I enjoy watching my 3 grandchildren play soccer and football. What a beautiful biography. It sounds like you've had a very engaged, adventurous life, Michael. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. You mentioned the origin of my interest in the outdoors. It actually does stem from my high school experience and the fact that I had wonderful faculty members at St. James High School in Bay City, Michigan, turned me on to Henry David Thoreau in Walden's Pond. And I read him, and I, of course, had the luxury of spending some time outdoors in Michigan. But he also taught in his work something that stuck with me, and that is that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life that he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. That never left me, and Thoreau's love and experience in the outdoors was part and parcel of my learning. So later on, I got a chance to spend more time in the outdoors. And when I heard about the challenge of Outward Bound, I was immediately drawn to Outward Bound. And really the history of the origin of Outward Bound is exactly what is part and parcel of the teaching that I think is very helpful for young men. You have to remember that this happened in World War II. Kurt Hahn was the founder, and British seamen were dying at sea. Once the Germans sunk their boats, they got into lifeboats. But what they discovered was that the older sailors were surviving and the younger ones were not. And it had to do with psychology. It did not have to do with physiology. The younger should survive. So they put together a program that endures to this day and is also copied by other outdoor learning schools, such as the National Outdoor Leadership School in Wyoming. But, there were 6 Outward Bound schools when I was in college. I think there's more now. But they teach things that I think are very helpful for lifelong learning. And one of them is to dare, to take a chance. He who dares wins. That's actually a model for a number of military units. But you have to dare in life in order to make progress. And you cannot be intimidated by fear of failure. I often taught my students about failure is a path. It's on the path to success. And Thomas Edison made that, very clear. I really liked his attitude when he was asked about the fact that he had 1,000 efforts, 1,000 failures in the eyes of the reporter to invent the incandescent light bulb. And he corrected him and he said, no, there are 1,000 steps to the creation of the light bulb. So that's something to keep in mind. You dare, you're not intimidated by failure, and you dare greatly, and you're going to accomplish more in life. That's been my observation. And it's also been something that people have come back to me, my students, and told me that, they set higher goals. And I recall one U.S. Marine who came back to me at my high school 20 years later and looked me up to tell me that he remembered one thing that I had just mentioned in class. I gave him the story later, but it had to do with taking a chance. And he kept trying to advance in rank, and he did. And he was then an officer, but he didn't start out as an officer. And I also had a fellow that went into the Army, and he just remembered a simple thing that I teach when I take kids in the woods and go into the canoe trips. And that's, the 5 Ps: prior planning prevents poor performance. And many tasks and challenges and events that we are confronted with in life can be conquered in advance by prior planning. So this young man, who was learning disabled, he was in special education, he had a very poor academic record, and he was in fact in trouble with the law when I first met him. And he went on to become a United States Army sergeant and had a 20-year career. And he told me the first thing he did when he went to boot camp was to go up to his officer and volunteer to do extra work. And he did. And everybody was amazed. And he volunteered to whitewash the huts that advanced infantry training people spend in the state of Washington. Interestingly enough, that's where I did my outward bound, was the state of Washington. And his sergeant never forgot that, his training sergeant. And he put him in leadership positions. Of course, he had to earn his way there, but he put him in leadership positions following that experience.
Wow.
And 22 years later, he came back from Germany and found me at the high school and told me about the 5 Ps. So, these are just events that people can incorporate into their careers, into their lives. But I think that the message that we learned from Kurt Hahn, the creator of Outward Bound, he had a dislike for sitting and being lectured to and sitting in a classroom. And he felt that you could learn, and he established a school before World War II, learning outdoors, learning by doing. And that's also, the approach that's used in the learning schools, outdoor leadership training, and in Outward Bound.
Okay. So you've talked about some things that your students remembered, they held on to. You were inspired by teachers. They were inspired by a teacher. When you're thinking about homeschooling families and some of the lessons that we can be thinking about, that we can be kind of targeting, when we take our boys into the outdoors, what are some lessons that they experience through the outdoors that we can start to think about when we're planning for their development?
Encourage and structure events that require courage, that require the development of courage. And I say that because courage is really, in my book, the queen of all virtues that we learn about, justice and prudence. And, from Plato through St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, we learn about all of these virtues that are necessary for success in life, real success. But you don't actualize those without that one kernel, and that's courage. And again, back to the fact that you have to be willing to risk, you have to be willing to dare, you have to be willing to fail. It takes courage to try and to realize that you might fail. Well, so what? A whole lot of folks have failed, and that's how we have inventions. That's how we have progress in life, is by failure, and yet you persevere. So, I think of one individual again that was very inspirational for me to learn about is a priest, a chaplain in the United States Army. His name was Father Emile Capon. I think about him weekly. Father Emile Capon was with the U.S. Army in Korea, and his unit was overrun by the Chinese communists, and there were wounded men around. And even before this event, even before his unit was overrun, in another battle, he had gone out under fire and rescued a wounded man who would have been, incarcerated and probably killed by the Chinese communists. And he brought him back to safety. And he didn't have to do that. He won a medal for that. But when he was given a chance to evacuate with the rest of the unit because the Chinese communists were about to overwhelm them, he chose not to. He said, "No, I'm going to stay here with the wounded men." Now, he knew full well what was going to happen to him as a POW with, Chinese communists. And he nonetheless stuck with his men. That took a great deal of courage. And sure enough, he was physically abused, starved, brutalized. He always made an effort to take care of his men. His men never forgot that. And at one point, when the Chinese communists, again, had conquered his unit, an officer was going to shoot and kill a Sergeant Herb Miller. And he ran over, pushed the Chinese communists away with his weapon, and picked up Sergeant and saved him. And for some reason, the communists didn't shoot and kill him. But his men never forgot that. And that's the way he, throughout his incarceration, his life as a POW, he took care of his men. And the Chinese communists totally resented that. And so they engineered his death. They threw him in this starvation bunker. And he knew once you went to this one particular incarceration hut, you were going to die. And his men started to resist that. And he said, "No, don't worry. Where I'm going, I'll continue to pray for you. And I know where I'm going." So, that's courage. That's perseverance. And he won the Medal of Honor. Father Emile Capon won the Medal of Honor. Well, that's what I mean about the queen of virtues. Courage. You have to have courage to actualize the other virtues. And perseverance. He was starved. He was cold and freezing like the rest of the soldiers, but he continued and he persevered. And no doubt, his faith, his commitment to others was rooted in his Catholic training and education. And I always think of my favorite, I pray the rosary every day, but one of my favorites is I find myself most frequently praying the agony in the garden, and sorrowful mystery. The first sorrowful mystery, for some reason, really captivates my attention because Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen to him.
Mm-hmm.
He knew. And also, talk about perseverance. Now, he got up and went and asked for help. He had a human side. He was looking for help, some psychological support from his own disciples, and they had fallen asleep. And the agony in the garden is even more intense for when you think about Jesus, who had the power to vanquish any adversary. Father Emile Capone didn't have that power. He persevered. But Jesus actually had the power to conquer the Romans. But he chose instead to be crucified and to save us. Now, the message of love is very apparent there, but also, the courage to face and to know full well what was coming to him. The human side of this suffering has been well described, but Jesus' suffering was immense. So I would say, keep in mind that courage and perseverance are the way to actualize the other virtues in life that are going to stand you well and help you make progress.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. We're going to just take a quick break here to hear from our sponsor, and we will be right back, everybody, with Michael Boucher. Don't go away.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now, back to our program.
All right, everybody, we are back with Michael Boucher, an author and an outdoorsman, just having a wonderful, deep conversation about building leadership in boys through the outdoors, and we've had some inspiring examples. I'm rereading The Hobbit right now, and I can't help thinking about how often he wishes to be back in the comforts of his home, but what's happening is that he's experiencing a lot of discomfort, a lot of challenge, and he's discovering things within himself. So would you take us, Michael, into some specific things that we can do with our boys to challenge and stretch them into these beautiful virtues?
Surely. One of the experiences that I highly recommend is to obviously go and do delightful places to go and to learn and to be, and you can actually time it so that you go on guided hikes and that under the guidance of a ranger. But mountain climbing is definitely one of the sources of challenge, a great source of challenge. Hiking, and then I can share. I'll give you an example of climbing. When I was on Outward Bound, I had both. I was very, very challenged and failed immensely in one experience with the courage component, and that was we were doing 3 120-foot climbs. On the second climb, you're on a ledge and awaiting the rope to hook in. Without that rope, you can fall down several hundred feet. So I was waiting for the rope to come over, and it came over. I hooked in, and the instructor's on the top looking down. And so as I started up, to the left was handholds and footholds. Those are places where a mountain climber can gain support and conquer the gravity and pull oneself up and make progress. On the right-hand side was a bald rock. I mean, bald. and no place to hang, to hide, to grasp. And it was a challenge. So the instructor said, well, Mike, you can do it on the left. Try it on the right. Try something you haven't done before. It's not been done. There were we were on 10-man patrols. So 3 other men had already gone up the left side. So he's challenged me to go up the right side, the bald side. And so I tried. I got up right about the top of that bald rock, and I fell all the way back down. Now, you're being belayed. You have a rope you're attached to. Person on the top has to stop you from falling. That's called belaying. And he stopped me, and I banged around a little bit. I wasn't hurt, but I was, bruised up a little. And then so I had to start back. You got to get to the top of the mountain, right? So the instructor said, go on, try it again. And I said, no. I took the left side, and I got to the top, and the instructor, Mr. Hinckley, looked at me, and he smiled, and he knew that I just didn't have the courage to go back at that and try it again and fall. I was very fearful of that. But that's one of the examples of knowing that you should try to challenge yourself, and you should try. And there were other things that I did. I later on, I actually saved a man from falling off the mountain on a scree slope, which was another effort. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but he was falling down from about 100 feet above me and going right over a cliff. And so I had to anchor myself. I anchored my right foot and my right hand, and I was not roped. So, he could easily have pulled me over too. But I anchored myself, and he came tumbling by, and I grabbed his pack and I arrested his fall. Now, that was something I would not probably have done, certainly, when I started out. It's a 28-day course. But with the inspiration and guidance and direction of that instructor, Dan Hinckley, that I made reference to, I was willing to try it. And obviously had a good result for my buddy. But it was something that I certainly, when I look back on it, when I look, and they ask you, they're always evaluating you on outward bound. Would you have done this before? And the answer was, no, I wouldn't have. So that failure event back at that 120-foot climb where I chose not to do the bald rock, it actually taught me something too. And also given me, that impetus to try and know that I could fail.
Yeah, so good. So good. So much of our society is about publicly winning and comparisons and one-upping each other. But to understand that key, that we learn so much from our failures, often more than our successes. Michael, I'd like you to just take a couple of minutes. We read the description of your new book, The Snipe Hunter's Deadly Catch at Muskrat Creek, and we know it's about teens and outdoor skills and learning virtue. What would you like the impact of this story to be? And say anything you like about how we might use this book with our kids in our homeschools.
Well, the origin of the book is really a victory story. It originates from a student I was counseling, and there was a killing in his family, and he had a terrible, understandable but terrible response to it. He perpetrated an act of arson, and he got incarcerated. And many of us, not only at Catholic Family Service where I was working, but also even the state police and the sheriff and so on, and he was felt that he was not well served by the law enforcement system. I never forgot that story, and he went away for he went away. I ended up going to graduate school, and I got a call back from the director of the agency saying that I had a package that I had to open, and I had to come back over 120 miles to the agency and open it. And it was a gift. It was a drawing, a painting done by this particular student. And I never forgot that. So it was 40 years later that I decided to tell his story. And he was indelibly imprinted on my mind. So I took training, of course. I went to a number of classes and semesters in creative writing, and I told his story, and I told his story based on a delightful area that is in Michigan, the Asaba River, and it's an award-winning trout stream as well. But there's a lot of neat activities around that river and the entire part of Michigan that I write about, and there's other stories embedded within that book that allow for students and for readers to enjoy as well as to profit from. So I think the book will have an appeal to certainly the outdoorsman and people who enjoy a challenge and adventure. That's in there as well. But also, two of my students have something that is the pathway to victory in life, and that's the rosary, and that's rooted in praying the rosary, and that actually is rooted in my own experience. My father, who died when I was 12, I learned decades later that he took the rosary into the foxholes of the South Pacific, World War II, battling the Japanese. And he never spoke to me about this. I learned about this through letters. He was quite a prodigious letter writer. And I got those letters when I was like 4 or 5 decades later. I got those letters. And he tells the story in there. And he was in hand-to-hand combat. He landed at Lady Beach, where the famous Douglas MacArthur strode ashore. Well, my father his unit cleared the beach that General Douglas MacArthur went ashore on.
Wow.
And so my mother, she died as she lived. She literally died as she lived. She had the rosary in her hand when she died at age 97. And
God bless her.
She had taught the rosary to people in her old age home, the rest home that she stayed in. There are several people who never heard the word Jesus Christ until talking to my mom, and they were always wondering about, what's this thing in your hand? What's this rosary all about? Well, when I went to her funeral, which was this was 400 miles away from my home, and I didn't know any of those people. They came to her funeral. People on the staff came to her funeral. They were impacted by her sharing of the rosary and her incorporation of her faith into her life. So both my father and my mother had these experiences. And again, my mom was, she taught us the rosary. She showed us the rosary. But she was in no way, pedantic about the rosary or having other people see her pray the rosary. She was pretty quiet about it. But it had an impact on her life, and of course, my father's life as well. So one of the characters in my book also does the teaching thing. Now, he's not, a Boy Scout in terms of virtues. He makes mistakes like the rest of us, but he acknowledges the need.
And what would you say is the best age range for your book, Michael? Who should read it?
I would say mid-high school through college.
Okay. Very good. Good to know. And Mike, I'm just so touched that you brought it around to the rosary and the example of your parents. There's so much that goes into making up our character. As we're wrapping up, what's a final thought that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Well, I'm very inspired by several people in the Archdiocese of Detroit who incorporate their faith in their life, and they teach in a way that's very meaningful. Father John Ricardo is one very gifted orator. His homilies are definitely able to take the gospel, and as I call it, you take the gospel and you put legs under it, and that's sort of part of what inspired me to go to Armenia and serve on Habitat for Humanity teams and build a home in the mountains of Yeknazor, Armenia. Matthew 25, that whole last chapter 25 is about what I call putting legs under the gospel. Jesus talks about, the sheep and the goats. And if you're going to get to heaven, you want to be a sheep. You don't want to be a goat.
Mm-hmm.
and the way you do that is you remember the poor, you remember the hungry, you remember those who are in prison and the homeless, and you feed and clothe and help out your fellow man. So I would say that a number of the people that I've been exposed to at St. John's Armenian Church, at Holy Family, at the Archdiocese of Detroit, they've inspired that concept of putting legs under the gospel.
Wonderful. So beautiful to think of it in those terms, putting legs on it, that we can walk out our faith. Everybody, Michael's been gracious enough to include his email in the show notes. That's mikekanoe@aol.com, and canoe is spelled with a K. Have that in the show notes. Also, the link to his wonderful new book, The Snipe Hunter's Deadly Catch at Muskrat Creek. And again, that's for high school, middle high school through college age. I'll also include a couple of other things in the show notes just for your convenience about Outward Bound and a couple of other things. But just want to really thank you, Michael. Because I had COVID and lots of other things happened, it took a lot to get us to this moment to have this conversation. And Michael has been saintly in his patience with me. So I want to thank you with all my heart, Michael, for your incredible generosity and kindness.
I would like to say in my defense, as a former college instructor, I do know how to spell canoe, but I chose to spell it with a K in order to get that domain name. So
sounds good. No, it's awesome. It's totally fine. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this really lovely and deep conversation about how the outdoors can help our boys really grow in virtue. Big thanks to Michael Boucher, and we hope you'll all join us next time at Homeschooling Saints. God bless you. And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.